Welcome to Mr. Strawman. Today, we'll find out what can happen at a gas station late at night. Weird things happen on gas station night shifts. This one crosses a line I can't explain. I used to work the night shift at a gas station, not one of those lonely outpost stations sitting on an empty highway in the middle of nowhere, and not one tucked neatly into some busy urban neighborhood either. It occupied that strange gray zone in between, a stretch of road lined with budget housing, fast food chains, and convenience stores situated just off a two-lane road within shouting distance of a major interstate. During the day, we served beachgoers loading up on snacks and fuel, commuters cutting through to nearby cities, ordinary people living ordinary lives. But after sundown, the whole nature of the place shifted. That was when the real characters emerged. Drunks would push through the front door and beeline straight for the refrigerated section at the back. Teenagers would drift in, attempting to buy cigarettes, flashing IDs that ranged from suspiciously convincing to laughably fake. Honestly, I didn't lose much sleep over it. If they wanted to damage their own lungs, that was their decision to make, not mine. Then there were the obviously stoned regulars who'd load their arms with chips and frozen treats. The ice cream crowd particularly entertained me. They'd almost always ask for a spoon, and all we had were those flimsy plastic ones that bent under any real pressure. I once watched a man spend a full 20 minutes wrestling with a soft serve cup, the spoon curling uselessly every time he tried to scoop. One night, around midnight, a man walked in, stuffed several items under his jacket in plain sight, strolled back outside, and then calmly dialed the police on himself. I followed him out, genuinely baffled, and asked what on earth he was doing. He told me, without any embarrassment whatsoever, that he just needed somewhere warm to sleep. I told him if he was committed to the bit, he might want to at least put some distance between himself and the store before the cruiser arrived. He took the advice. I heard the sirens maybe 4 minutes later, but none of that is why I eventually quit. There was one particular night that ended my time there for good, and even now I find myself reluctant to revisit it in too much detail. It was a graveyard shift like any other. Me, the humming of the refrigerators, and the faint glow of the overhead fluorescents. The clock read somewhere around 2:20 in the morning. I was staring at the two blinking dots on the digital display, watching them pulse between the hours and minutes. When the door chime sounded, the man who walked in was short, maybe 5'2" at a stretch, and looked to be somewhere in his mid-50s. His skin had that weathered, loose quality you see in people who've spent decades being hard on themselves. His arms and legs were dusted with fine white hairs that matched the long, tangled ropes of white hair hanging from his scalp. Something tells me this guy isn't just some random homeless guy who wandered in to steal a little alcohol. It had the look of hair that hadn't seen shampoo in at least 2 weeks, matted, clumped together, plastered in sections against itself. He moved with a strange deliberateness, each step placed as though he was thinking carefully about it, as if walking required conscious instruction. He eventually reached the counter and dropped both hands onto it heavily, leaning on them for support. His knuckles were a road map of raised veins, branching like cracks through old porcelain. Thick black grit lined the undersides of his fingernails. When he finally opened his mouth to speak, he revealed a set of yellowed, slick-looking teeth. He rasped out a question about where the bathroom was, and I pointed toward the back corridor without a word. There was a short hallway back there that led to 2 storage rooms and a single occupancy restroom. He shuffled off in that direction, and I quietly exhaled once he was out of my line of sight. The door clicked shut. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. I started watching the hallway. 20 minutes is a long time for anyone to be in a gas station bathroom, but for a man who'd already unsettled me just by walking through the door, it felt considerably longer. I eventually left my post and knocked. He called back that he was fine, but the voice didn't match the word. Something in the tone was off, strained, not quite convincing. I returned to the counter. Another 10 minutes crawled by. That's when I heard it, moaning. Low at first and hard to identify, but it grew steadily clearer. I was back at the bathroom door before I'd fully decided to move. Up close, the sounds coming from the other side were unmistakably wrong. The man was in pain or frightened or both. I knocked again. No answer at first, just more of that awful sound. Then, barely audible through the door, 2 words. Help me. The moaning sharpened into yelling. I heard impacts against the walls, felt the faint vibration of them through the floor. I grabbed the handle, but of course it was locked from the inside. Panic started leaking in around the edges of my composure. A foul odor was beginning to seep out from under the door. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a severe stomach episode. Maybe it was nothing more dramatic than that. But even as I constructed that explanation, I wasn't convinced by it. It would be easier for him to believe it was a prank than something truly supernatural. I shouted at him to unlock the door. He didn't. Instead, he started talking, rambling really, about how he couldn't open it, how he was only safe inside that room, how they had found him out, how they were on their way. His words slurred and fractured between his cries for help. He just kept asking for help, over and over, while banging against the walls. I spent the next several minutes pacing that narrow hallway with both hands pressed against my skull, trying to think. His sounds had faded by then, which frightened me more than the noise had. Eventually, I went into the adjacent storage room, grabbed a heavy-duty hand truck we used for shifting crates, and drove it into the bathroom door with everything I had. The smell that greeted me nearly knocked me off my feet. I staggered back, gagging, and caught myself against a nearby shelf to keep from going down. The man was on the floor, slumped at an angle against the wall, spine curved in that way. A body curves when it simply stops holding itself upright. The wall beside him bore the evidence, dark smears and shallow craters where his fists had connected repeatedly. He'd been sitting in the aftermath of a severe loss of bodily control. He was not on the toilet. He had not made it anywhere near it. I got back on my feet, moved into the main area, and called the police. I gave the operator what description I could manage while trying to keep my voice level. I told them I believed I was looking at a possible overdose. A pale yellow powder ringed the man's nose and mouth, and there was a faint foam gathered at the corners of his lips. His eyes were open, bloodshot, and dull in a way that I had never seen in a living person. I told the operator I was stepping outside for air and would be back within minutes. I was outside for no more than 5 minutes. The sirens were already audible as the night air hit me. When I led the officers and paramedics back through the store and down the hallway, the smell was still there. The damage to the wall was still there. A faint residue of the yellow powder remained on the floor tiles, but the man was gone. Not gone in the sense of having recovered and walked out calmly while I stood in the parking lot. There were no footprints through the mess on the floor, no smeared handprints on the wall or door frame, no drag marks, no indication that a body had been moved or that anyone had helped him out, just an absence where a man had been, as clean and complete as if he had simply ceased to be there. I don't have an explanation for it. I've never been able to construct one that satisfies me. I gave my notice a few days later. I couldn't make myself go back after that, not for any hourly rate they could have offered. What stays with me, even now, isn't the image of him on the floor. It's the things he said from behind that locked door, the certainty in his voice, even as it fell apart, that they had finally caught up with him. I genuinely hope he was wrong about that. The next story is about a truck driver who got lost and came across a neon sign at a gas station that read, "Open." I stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. Everyone inside wanted me to stay forever. There is something about long stretches of empty road that gets into a person's blood. I grew up with it. Family road trips every few months, piling into the car before dawn. My parents refusing to reveal the destination until we were already miles from home. By the time I was a teenager, I had covered more ground than most people do in a lifetime. Highways became second nature to me. The rhythm of the asphalt, almost meditative. It is probably no surprise that I ended up behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler for a living. The company I drive for hauls freight to all corners of the country. And after years on the job, most routes have become so deeply embedded in my body that I barely need to think. There is a phenomenon truckers call highway hypnosis. You blink, and somehow 100 miles have passed without you consciously registering a single one. I had come to rely on that autopilot more than I like to admit. That is what made the stretch of road in Nebraska so deeply unsettling. One moment I was cruising down a familiar 2-lane highway outside of Milford, and the next I was traveling through an ocean of wheat with absolutely no idea how I had gotten there. I eased off the throttle, slowing to a crawl, scanning the horizon in every direction. Nothing. No exits, no signs, no grain elevators on the horizon. Just flat, golden fields and a road that seemed to lead nowhere in particular. I hit the brakes harder than I intended, my truck and trailer groaning and shuddering in protest, and reached for my phone. No signal. Not one bar. I shook my head in frustration. After everything I had seen on the road, you would think I would have invested in a satellite plan by now. There was nothing to do but keep driving and look for a turnaround. Or better yet, another human being. I drove for 30 minutes, then an hour, then 2. The pressure of my company's delivery schedule was building in the back of my mind like a slow headache. I was debating the legality of performing a U-turn directly into someone's wheat crop when I noticed something on the horizon. A small, dark shape. I accelerated. The shape grew into a rectangle, then into a building, and finally revealed itself to be a gas station with a fast food restaurant awkwardly attached to its side. I'm afraid he'll have to stop here and go into that shady place. I'm sure it's already waiting for him. The construction looked mismatched, as though 2 entirely different buildings from 2 entirely different eras had been bolted together by someone who had never seen a blueprint. The signage on both structures had faded so thoroughly that I could not make out which chains they had once advertised. The fuel pumps were sun-bleached to a uniform pale gray. Everything about the place suggested it had been standing since long before anyone thought to photograph it. Still, the flickering neon open sign buzzed and pulsed in the window, and that was good enough for me. I parked and jogged across the lot to the entrance, relieved just to have found something. Through the grimy glass, I could see a figure standing behind the counter, a teenager, lanky and pale, who looked up the instant I pushed through the door. The bell above the entrance gave a flat, tuneless chime. "Sorry about that," I said, laughing a little. "Didn't mean to interrupt your daydream." The boy did not laugh. He did not blink. He simply stood there with his mouth slightly open and his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that felt deeply wrong. I stepped up to the counter and leaned against it, trying to project normalcy. "I'm pretty lost," I said. "Any chance you have a map I could look at?" His head turned slowly, a full 90 degrees to the left, then all the way back to the right, as though the motion was mechanical rather than voluntary. Then his arm shot upward, rigid and straight, pointing at a doorway connecting the gas station to the restaurant side. "Food," he exhaled, the word more of a groan than actual speech. My stomach responded before my brain did. I had not eaten in hours. I glanced back at him to say something, but he was simply gone. The space behind the counter was completely empty, and I had not heard a single footstep. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it, and then walked through the doorway into the restaurant. There were 3 other people seated inside. 2 men who had the unmistakable look of long-haul truckers, worn jackets, tired eyes, and a young woman whose pregnancy was visibly advanced. As I entered, all 3 looked up simultaneously, watching me with slow, unblinking attention. I nodded at the men and gave a small wave to the woman. None of them responded. I approached the counter and my stomach dropped slightly when the same teenager rose from behind it. I had not seen him come through. There was no back hallway connecting the 2 sides, at least not one I had noticed. I forced a grin. "Small world," I said. He did not acknowledge the joke. I ordered a burger and fries to go, and he disappeared behind a shelving unit. When he returned, the food was on a tray, not in a bag. I thought about correcting it, then decided it was not worth the effort. I had been sitting in a truck cab for most of the day. I found an empty booth and settled in. I reached for a fry. The moment it touched my tongue, I recoiled violently, knocking the tray off the table entirely. The fry was rancid, soft, cold, and foul in a way that made my throat close up. The burger had scattered across the floor, and what I saw inside it turned my stomach completely. The patty was crawling, the bun mottled with mold. I spun around. What on earth? Finally, they stopped pretending that their intention was to leave him there forever. The teenager was directly in front of me. His face was perhaps 3 centimeters from mine. I stumbled backward and collided with the solid chest of one of the truckers. I looked around. The pregnant woman was to my left, the second trucker to my right. They had moved without making a sound. All 4 of them stared at me with the same fixed, expressionless gaze. "Stay," they exhaled together in a low, hollow unison. "Stay." I am not proud of what happened next, but I will not apologize for it either. I swung at the teenager, catching him squarely across the jaw. My fist did not stop where it should have. There was a sharp crack, and the boy collapsed to the floor with a sound like a bundle of dry branches hitting concrete. I did not wait to think about it. I vaulted over him and ran out of the restaurant, through the gas station, across the parking lot, and into the cab of my truck. I locked the door, turned the engine over, and floored it. The truck was slow to respond, and in those few agonizing seconds, I looked back through the windshield. The 2 truckers and the pregnant woman were standing side by side at the entrance of the station. And then, as I watched, the teenager was pulled out to join them, not walking, but dragged upright by nothing, his limbs completely limp, his body arranged on its feet by an unseen hand, his head jerked upward, and I saw what my punch had done. His face had split down the center, not broken skin, not blood, just a clean, dark divide, revealing nothing on the other side. He was hollow. There was nothing inside him at all. Then, my truck finally lurched forward, and the station disappeared into the distance behind me. It took another 2 hours to find the highway. I have no idea how exactly. I just drove. And eventually, the road delivered me back to somewhere recognizable, somewhere with other vehicles and working cell service and the ordinary noise of the world. I have driven through every state in this country. I have seen things that would take most people a lifetime to find, but I know now with absolute certainty that there are places hidden out in the flat, golden middle of nowhere that do not appear on any map. And if you are ever lucky enough to find one of them, your only job is to make sure you do not stay. It was Mr. Strawman, and remember, some stories follow you home.